Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a B-movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Battle of the Damned. And this also can be seen as Robotropolis 2, which I'll come on to again in just a little bit. So the basic premise of this film is 80s action star versus zombies versus robots. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Now, the story here basically we centres it around a mercenary played by Dolph Lundgren with a manly name of Max Gatling. And basically he's tasked with a small band of kind of other mercenaries to try and retrieve some kind of like rich guy's daughter from this kind of hot zone, which is ultimately a South Asian city which has been sealed off due to some kind of sort of infection, some kind of outbreak, which essentially makes the kind of inhabitants essentially zombies. And there's kind of a running joke throughout the film basically where the people are arguing if they're zombies or not because technically they're still alive. So you're looking at basically kind of 28 days later style zombies who are not actually dead but ultimately pretty much have all the other sort of tropes. And he's sent in to try and kind of recover this guy's daughter. There he finds a sort of a small group of survivors. He's the only one left out of his team, and ultimately his mission is to try and extract this daughter. These kind of humans, other humans, end up coming along for the ride. And then halfway through the film, a bunch of robots show up. Now that might sound random, and I'm going to come on to that again in a minute. The idea is to sort of try and escape the city before the government are ultimately going to kind of firebomb the city and destroy everything in there and kind of fight off these kind of waves and waves of zombies. If you've seen the movie Robotropolis, this is actually a sequel to that movie. But it doesn't really sort of specify that. And if you haven't seen Robotropolis, you're going to be wondering why the hell there's a bunch of robots that are sort of showing up seemingly out of nowhere for no particular reason. And we're sort of told ultimately, if you've seen Robotropolis, essentially that's kind of like a robots of uprising movie, and a bunch of these kind of robots escape. And in that film, they were the bad guys. However, in this film, they've kind of sorted out their programming, and they're pretty much now on the good guy side, or they're ultimately just sort of like wandering around, and sort of Dolph Lundgren kind of sort of takes charge of them. There is some conflict in the robots as well, though, so they're not all particularly they're not all good guys. If you haven't seen Robotropolis, I think you'll be thinking, what the hell? But it does follow another. It doesn't really point out. When I sort of saw this one, I didn't realise at all that it was actually a kind of, it's really more of a spin-off than a sequel. But there you go. But it's quite an interesting premise, I think, and it was quite fun. I think the Robotropolis film had some potential, but I didn't think it was a particularly good film. I actually think this film is considerably better. I think the kind of the settings are really good. It really does look like a kind of a very sort of rundown sort of locale that they've sort of chosen. So it does look sort of like dirty and grimy, like it has been overtaken. Obviously, this is kind of a low budget film, so they've obviously done some good sort of location here. I think the acting is a lot better than the kind of the Robotropolis film as well. That was one of my major gripes of that one. There are some issues with it. I think maybe sometimes the direction's a little flat here, and a little kind of pedestrian. Certainly not bad, but nothing that's going to sort of elevate it. And there are some issues maybe with the script. For example, we're told that these zombies. I'm just going to call them zombies because ultimately they're just infected people. But for the sake of this, I'm going to call them zombies. We're told that they kind of react to sound and that sort of thing. But we have the Major Max Gatling sort of walking down just an open street with her talking on the radio, and obviously attracting zombies' attentions. I mean, if you were a trained military person, you simply wouldn't do that. So there's a few instances like that where it just kind of maybe goes into sort of a few cliches, just ultimately to sort of wind the story onto another sort of action set piece. But overall, I actually found this was a pretty entertaining B movie. I thought the actual, as I said, the setup of the kind of this zombie sort of apocalypse type thing was pretty decent, and I thought although the zombies weren't necessarily particularly sort of gruesome looking, they did a decent job of kind of being this sort of quite a sort of menacing force that's sort of sweeping this kind of like city, ultimately sort of just eating everything that comes into their path. I also think there's a little bit of a grey area when they encounter this kind of other band of humans, and when Dolph Lundgren encounters these other sort of group of survivors. They have the kind of leader of their sort of group has their own agenda. He's not necessarily a bad guy, but he's just doing what he thinks is right, which ultimately comes to odds with what Dolph Lundgren's character wants to do as well. So that was an interesting dichotomy there. So this was actually a pretty decent film. I actually quite enjoyed it. And it was thoroughly, I was actually thoroughly entertained with this movie. So it's not perfect. The sort of CG on the robot sometimes looks a little bit ropey. It's again, it's a low budget film. They do use a sort of mixture of practical and CGI effects. If you haven't seen Robotropolis, I do recommend you watch that first, just so you kind of maybe get a little bit of backstory about what the actual robots are. Because I think if you're coming into this and you haven't seen it or you're completely unaware of that film, you'll probably just think, why the hell is there just a random bunch of robots there? So I'm going to give this movie a 7 out of 10. Quite enjoyed it. Go check it out. Leave me a comment and let me know what your thoughts are. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.